Good evening, everybody. It's Roger Walters here from Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, which this is a co-production with We Believe in Israel. And I'd like to welcome you all, remembering that it's Holocaust Memorial Day today. And we should all, I'm sure by now, have thought about it quite seriously. And also at the same time, rejoice. I suppose if you have to say rejoice in the return of the last hostage, Ran Gvili, to Israel, to his family. This evening, we have a very interesting discussion. We have two distinguished guests and our very own Executive Director, Catherine, who will be discussing the Gaza peace plan, what it aims to achieve, the security realities on the ground, and whether it can realistically deliver stability. I'm privileged to introduce Andrew Fox, the former military officer who has become a respected defense and security analyst, famous for cutting through the rhetoric to assess what plans look like in practice. He's joined by Jake Wallis-Simmons, his co-host of the Brink, which they recently initiated, a very worthwhile podcast that they release on a weekly basis. But focusing on the strategic analysis of global conflict. Jake was the editor of the Jewish Chronicle and one of the most prominent commentators on Israel, anti-Semitism and Middle East politics in the UK, writing extensively in the Telegraph in the aftermath of October 7. His latest book, Never Again, has been extremely well received, and his previous book, Israelophobia, has been an enormous success. They both join us today with our very own Catherine Perez-Shakdam, political and geopolitical commentator with deep expertise in Middle East politics and international relations, known for her nuanced reporting and analysis. She's covered conflicts and diplomacy and regional development across the Middle East. So please sit back and listen carefully to their analysis of the complex issues shaping the region of the Middle East. Take it away, please, Jake.
Well, that sounds like my cue. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to, there's a number of issues that are converging on the same day. One, of course, is Holocaust Memorial Day. We've heard that of the 2,000 schools that marked the Holocaust back in 2023, only 854 are still doing that. And that's this very day. Also, of course, the Iranian regime continues to massacre protesters en masse on the streets, gunning them down. And we've got Gaza to talk about. And as a coincidence, this evening, we've just released the latest episode of The Brink, which is an interview with Ahmed Faoud al-Khatib, who will be known to many of you, Palestinian from Gaza who now lives in America and is an analyst on Gaza. And he actually revealed to us how he was being groomed by Hamas to join their ranks when he was a young person living in Gaza. And he met the founder of Hamas face to face, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. And that was really fascinating. So for more on that, listen to that episode. And he talked a lot about the situation in Gaza. And so there's lots to talk about this evening. Andrew, where do you want to kick off today?
Well, where I'm kicking off from is the M4 motorway, so my apologies for that. I had to make an emergency no-notice trip to more than the lack of quality in the visuals. So my apologies for that one. Couldn't be avoided, but it's great to join you all tonight. I think if we start with Gaza, that makes a lot of sense because obviously the last hostage body was returned yesterday, which means that now phase 2 can really charge ahead in Gaza. The issue is that nobody is still entirely sure what phase 2 looks like. We know that there is a design for a security force, the ISF, the International Security Force, to take over. I was in the Civil Military Cooperation Center, the CMCC, in Kiryat Gat, down in southern Israel, just 2 weeks ago. And they freely admitted they basically had no plan. They were essentially coming up with a bunch of contingency plans that might be useful should anything concrete come of it. So that's not even in a place yet where it can even start to think about taking over the IDF. And even if we just look at the surface level, before we get into the international politics behind it, you have to consider what rules of engagement these troops are going to be on. What are their national caveats going to be? Who's responsible for resupply, and how's that going to happen? If one of them gets injured, which hospital do they go to? There's some really basic kind of military logistical issues here that haven't got any answers whatsoever. Those answers will come. The Board of Peace is established as the top level of authority over Gaza. There's going to be 2 more levels beneath that are still being established. The one closest to the ground being that technocratic board that they're going to set up to run Gaza. And there's some issues with that too. So there's lots of questions up in the air with Gaza phase 2, but the point is we can now start it, and that is at least some kind of progress.
Yeah, it feels like we've got the the Board of Peace. It's quite a complicated beast, actually, organizationally. There's the Board of Peace itself, which obviously is chaired by Trump, includes Steve Witkoff, Kushner, Blair. And then you've got also a collection of various different national leaders. Putin's been invited, of course, famously. The Qataris have been invited. The Turks have been invited. It's interesting that Starmer and the French and the Swedes and others snubbed the invitation, marking the first moment that I think Starmer can be said to be a Brexiteer. You would have thought he'd argue to join the organisation and change it from within rather than leave. But there we are. And then you've also got the technocrats, as you say, most of whom, they've all been screened by Israel so that they're not affiliated to Hamas, but most of them seem to be Palestinian Authority people, which seems to be remarkably like having the PA rule over Gaza. So, Catherine, you're in Israel at the moment. What's your take on all of that? And of course, what's the mood given the release of the final hostage? I saw in the news this evening that the famous clock in Hostage Square, which counts the number of days, hours and minutes in which the hostages have been kept in captivity, has been finally turned off after 843 days, I think. So what's it like over there, and what can you tell us about Gaza?
Look, personally, thank God I think this is the end of a chapter, not a nice one. But I think that, look, everyone here is very relieved. I was in Etzion earlier today doing a podcast with ILTV, and a lot of people were, around coffees and things like that, just talking about it. And I think that everybody was relieved. But there's a sense that even though we close the chapter, and of course, everyone is grateful that it's over, I feel that people tend to forget what happened in Gaza. They forget that Hamas, I'm not going to say that got away with it, but all the things that we demanded, all the things that we needed for people to get closure, really, it's important for the families to understand that, to see on the ground actions, not just talk, and to feel that never again is actually, for once, can we please stick to it? I'm very concerned that there's something, and we talked about it earlier with Steve, is the fact that we are asking of Israel to do something that other countries are not asked to do, which is to negotiate with the terrorist organization that is proscribed. Hamas is a proscribed organization in the UK, in other countries, and yet we're demanding of Israel to be negotiating constantly with that, hoping that it will be okay somewhere down the line. I don't believe it. I don't believe for a second that we should be negotiating with people who want us dead, who continue to maintaining constantly that they want to do it again, that October 7th was the beginning of something, with other people making the argument, like Greta Thunberg, that maybe it's an act of liberation, until we address the core of the issue, which is this desire to annihilate not just Israel, but the Jewish people. I don't think we're going to move away from violence. Peace will be a foreign concept. And what I like to say, it's something that maybe not be very popular, but peace is not necessarily the absence of war. And unfortunately, Israel finds itself in a neighborhood that is not very friendly. And we don't live in the West. Israel is very much in the Middle East. So until we understand, and I say we as a collective we, that we cannot ask Israel to behave, like I would say maybe the UK or France, for that matter, since you mentioned France and the beautiful President Macron, we can't be asking Israel to function as we would expect a European nation to, for example. The neighborhood is not the same. The behaviors are not the same. We cannot compare. And I feel that it's profoundly unfair. And I'm angry because I don't believe that this peace plan is a peace deal at all. I think it's some kind of a giving up. It's let's just move on to something else because we're too tired to actually make the right call and have the tough conversation. That's how I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I did a debate last night, and one of the questions came up, which so often does, was why can't Israel just be a single state? He actually said, why can't you just remove the borders between Gaza and the West Bank, allow everyone to flow freely into Israel, make it one person, one vote, have it as a democracy? Okay, that was spooky. And you know, I had to explain to him how that might look very fair and you know, sort of well-intentioned from sitting in a comfortable place in London. But if you're in Gaza, or sorry, rather, if you're in southern Israel near Gaza, and your family had been slaughtered by Hamas, you wouldn't be looking so kindly upon the idea of taking the border down. I mean, Andrew, what do you think this sort of cognitive dissonance, what role do you think that plays in terms of the military with the facts on the ground in Israel and how the West and the world at large is trying to grapple with it?
Well, I think if we can learn one thing from the last 20 years, it's that the West doesn't understand the Middle East at all. They don't understand the psychology of the countries they're dealing with. And that goes some large way, I think, to explaining how Mr. Trump has been so badly played by the Qataris, by the Turks, by the Saudis. You know, they don't think the same that we do. There is a different psychology that underpins it. And I think a lot of what Mr. Trump has done in the last year is going to have very long-term, lasting negative implications for the Middle East. You know, certainly in terms of things like the way he's empowered the Qataris and the Turks, and they are now rapidly becoming dominant regional powers where they never really were before. You know, Qatar has a defense pact with the United States that's never been offered to any country outside NATO. That puts them in a very impressive position from their perspective, given where they started off. That in turn has caused an internal competition in the Middle East between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they've had a huge falling out. We're even starting to see Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia start to regress on some of the progress that Saudi has made due to the new competition that has sprung up as a result of some of the deals Mr. Trump has made. So, you know, in terms of the way we in the West approach the Middle East, it's from a real lack of understanding, and it falls back to what you and I have discussed on numerous occasions, and that is the Wickhamist fallacy, the underlying assumption that everyone at the heart of things, strip everything else away, and everyone is going to behave in the same way that someone who was a graduate of Winchester College, how they would behave. You know, this is a real failing of understanding, and actually we also see it in China. There's a real lack of understanding of the Confucian mindset and how China thinks. So we're repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And I'm deeply bored at the number of times I've seen very pompous retired generals over the last 2 years recommending that the Israelis do what we did in Northern Ireland, just negotiate with Hamas and even come to a settlement. You know, it's just nonsensical because it completely fails to understand the underlying philosophy of Hamas as a movement. So, you know, we're in that same old trap in the Middle East where we're looking for easy answers, we're looking for straightforward answers, and we're misunderstanding the psychology of the people that we're actually negotiating.
Yeah, I mean, I think this brings us on to Iran, actually. And Catherine, you've obviously got a specialist knowledge of Iran, being, I think, the only one of the three of us who's actually spent time there. Andrew, you haven't been to Iran, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But the way in which it relates, I think, is that, I mean, I agree with broadly with what you say about Trump, but I always come back to these two things that he's done brilliantly well. One is it's important not to lose sight of the fact that he brought the hostages home, and probably in a way that no other president could have done. And that's just vital in terms of the conflict. But also the sight of those B-2 bombers heading over to Iran and destroying the nuclear program and setting it back 3 years is also not to be sneezed at. Those are two massive things. And the Iran question is very live at the moment. As you pointed out, Andrew, recently, a lot of American hardware heading to the region. It looks like the prelude to some sort of action. But then the knock-on effect of that in the region, in terms of the Gulf in particular, is interesting because they would rather have in some ways, a weak Iran than a chaotic Iran or a democratic Iran. a weak Iran allows other players to step into the vacuum. A chaotic Iran will breed instability, and a democratic Iran might cause the populations of Qatar or the Saudis or wherever to demand the same thing. I mean, Catherine, what's your take on the position of Iran at the moment and what might come next regionally if it were to collapse?
Okay, so I have a very different, I agree with everything that you're saying, but I have a very different read on things. And only because, if you recall, just a few days ago, there was a very interesting report in Reuters whereby the parliament in Iran issued a warning saying that if anyone was ever to come near Khamenei, then a fatwa would be issued calling for jihad mandatory.
And you've met Khamenei, haven't you, yourself?
Yes, I did. I did. I mean, it was a great pleasure. It was really fun to be sitting on the floor. But anyway, moving along. So they warned that this fatwa that would be mandatory. So not the same situation that we found when Sistani decided to create the PMU way back when, in 2014, I think it was. That jihad would be declared, not on Israel as you would expect it, because I was thinking, here we go again. No, against Arab states. So that feeds directly into something that I have been talking about for years and years and years, arguing that actually Israel was there as a distraction, meaning when Khomeini took over, one of the first things that he did, and we need to remember back then, Shia Islam was really a minority, a hated minority, in that they were the opposite of the Islamic world. That means that Khomeini, who read the text of the Muslim Brotherhood, it was a student of Al-Banna and all the rest of them, understood that in order to create an iteration of the Shia version of the Muslim Brotherhood, I give you the Islamic Republic of Iran, he also had to build a bridge with the rest of the Sunni world to find a common enemy so that he would get on this little colonial experiment with people believing that he wasn't doing that at all because they would be busy hating on somebody. That somebody is us, meaning the Jewish world and Israel, of course, the great Zionist entity that everybody loves to hate. And so the Arab Street was convinced that in order to be a good Muslim, you had to hate Israel and become pro-Palestinian. And the net was, I would say that the carpet-making progress was set in motion. And for decades after that, people got lulled by this idea, this siren call that as long as you hate on Israel, you're a good Muslim, you're a good Arab, the world will be great.
But if I could just interrupt briefly, I mean the revolution in Iran was in 1979, but the Arab hatred of Israel was pretty vehement before then.
I mean, I think it predates possibly Islam itself, but anyway, moving on to that. I mean, it's in this present in the DNA at this stage. But jokes aside, what it tells you is that if Israel was a distraction, what is the great plan? Now, remember, Khomeini was in the business of selling religion as a means to assert power over people and essentially colonize Iran, because Iran was the beginning of that project, this Islamic revolution system that they set in place and architected. What they really need and want is legitimacy, religious legitimacy, which is why they created Al-Quds Day. Not that they care about Jerusalem very much, because Jerusalem is not even in the Quran. But again, that doesn't bother them too much. They're selling you God as if, you would sell bonbons to people. And so they decided that, fine, we have a distraction. Now, the real price is Saudi Arabia. Why? Because of Medina and Mecca. They need those two holy cities in order to reinvent themselves, got into the region. And he said it to me himself. I mean, the first thing that he said to me was, do you think that God is a maniacal tyrant? And I was like, well, obviously not. But then he went on to say,
well, I mean, let's just put a pin here and just double click on that for a moment and tell us how you came to meet Khamenei and what your interaction was like.
The short version is I married badly. That's a very short version. And then I decided to walk myself into Yemen, believing that things would be great because I was young and naive. And then I discovered that, the Islamic world doesn't like you very much. And 10 years later, I found myself in front of Ayatollah Khamenei. I mean, I decided to do something about it long before I found myself in front of the guy.
And walk us through your meeting and what happened.
Well, the meeting didn't...
When was this? When was this? This was a few years ago.
It was in 2017. It was on the side of the Palestine conference. The very infamous conference from which Khamenei announced, well, he pretty much announced October 7th, but nobody knew at the time it was going to be October 7th. And it's actually, there's a transcript of the conference. And what scares me is at the time he set a clock of 5 years, saying in 5 years a singular event will take place that will shake the Jewish world and Israel. So that was quite chilling to hear that. No one knew what it was going to be. I don't think that anyone could have predicted it. But there you go. Now, I was summoned to go meet the guy. It was meant to be, I think, a great favor. What is interesting, and I said this many times, they draw psychological profiles of you. And they do that on an individual level, on a, if people belong to particular political parties and then community, and then it goes on and on and on until, entire nations are basically profiled. They do this because then they know how to behave with you. And so they decide whether they're going to give you the carrot or the stick, or they're going to blackmail you, scare you, whatever will work for you and your particular profile. In my case, I guess I decided if they were nice enough and made me feel special, I was a woman, therefore not much, maybe I'd be a good girl and do their bidding. They didn't find, it wasn't really me that had in front of them, so that was fine. And then
So
I learned,
go on.
no, go.
So you're shown into the room, and what's it like? How many people are in there, and what's it feel like?
It was literally just him. I was just ushered into this. I call it a wedding hall. It was a very kind of basic building. It kind of like Berlin, like it was cement. It wasn't very pretty. It was a bunker type of thing. The 1970s vomited into the room where it was a mismatch of carpets and neon lights. You could hear the light. It was very surreal. And there was a chair in the middle of the room. Wasn't for me, and I was asked to sit on the floor. Then he came in. Everybody disappeared except two goons on either side of the doors. There was a door by which I was let in, and there was another door in the back from which he came in.
And what was the conversation?
Well, it was a one-way conversation where I sat there and just waited for it to be over. And it just basically, look, not all of it. I don't remember all of it for the reason that I think that's my mind went somewhere else. The two things that I remember vividly was the two questions that they asked me. The first one being, do you understand? Why are people calling me a tyrant when after all I do is basically God's work, in the sense that he had, in his mind, power of life or death over 90 million people, which is quite chilling to think that a guy thinks himself divine to the point where he doesn't see the problem in murdering people and can't see the difference between between death, and I would say natural death, because you're born and you die like everything else in the world, and actually kind of hastening that process and being responsible for the death of millions of people potentially. But in his mind, it was fine. And then I realized that actually their fight, is against everything that is good. It's the light, it's the divine. It's a war against God. And it may sound silly and people will roll their eyes at me. I can hear it. But that is true. That's how they think. And until we grasp that this is their position, however silly we may feel it is, this is what they want to achieve. And so until we get a grip and understand that this is what we're fighting against, and we stop trying to fit our narrative onto theirs and to translate it in a way that we could digest, we're going to fail.
Yeah. That's just what Andrew was saying about our lack of ability to appreciate. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, the second thing that he said that matters a great deal is that he was asking me if I understood what they meant by death to Israel. And I'm sure you heard that, it's about the country, it's this Zionist entity, is this? No. What they mean by, and it's very simple, but at the same time, very chilling again. What they mean by Israel is the biblical Israel. It's Jacob. It's the sons and daughters of Jacob, meaning the Judeo-Christian world. If you really follow the thought up to the very end. Now, if you really want to get biblical about it, Israel means what? He who wrestles with God. Not as in get in the mud with God, as in you wrestle against your, the darkness within you to reach out to the divine and look for the light. We all learn that. Now, what they're trying to do is to annihilate that. Why? Because then obscurity would win. They don't want people with critical thinking. They do not want people who are turned towards, I would say, knowledge, therefore the light, to try to better themselves. People capable and willing to think for themselves and to create and to manifest a better world into existence. They want slaves.
Yeah.
And this is, look, the key to understand the regime in Iran is very simple. What you have is a manifestation of a new pharaoh, and the Israelites are the Iranians. And unless we want to become that, I would suggest that our beautiful Western capitals get a grip.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do. Iranians are crying out for freedom. And if you see them standing before the cannons with nothing but words and courage, you understand that we are in a situation. We walked out of Egypt. They haven't, they stuck there. And the world doesn't understand that this is an existential fight, not just for Iranians or for Israel for that matter. It's for humanity, truly, genuinely, because if we don't do something, we're going to lose our soul in the middle of this by allowing crimes, terrible crimes against humanity. And we know about this, I believe, especially today, we remember those we lost. It would be a tragedy to allow a construct such as that of the regime to carry on and people to argue containment, to argue diplomacy.
Yeah.
There's no diplomacy to be had with a regime that wants you dead. I'm sorry.
That's right. I mean, it's interesting to think about the Egyptian parallel. I suppose in a way, the Iranian in Iran, we're seeing the 10 plagues once again, but they're being brought upon the Iranian people, not upon the tyrants. You know, the plague of darkness has put the internet out, and certainly the plague of the massacre of the firstborn, and indeed every other born on the streets. But I mean, Andrew, where do you see the whole thing going? Do you think the regime will? Do you think military action will happen? Do you think the regime will collapse? And if so, what happens next regionally?
Look, I think it's clear that Trump is trying to do what he did last time and push negotiations right to the last minute. And, you know, last time over the 12-day war, we saw that the negotiations deadline was on one day. And the very next day, Israel were given the green light to go ahead with Operation Rising Lion. We can see Trump is trying to negotiate his way out of this one, but there is a huge amount of military hardware now in the Gulf. America is absolutely postured to conduct. And we've also had reports that air defences around the Gulf have been pushed up, you know, shipping in missile defences to make sure that should Iran retaliate against other Gulf states, as well as, you know, maybe Al Udeid base in Qatar or Israel, that at least those missile defences are in the right place. In terms of the airstrikes themselves and what may happen as a result, I give it a 50-50 chance of a good outcome, would be my take. There's so many men under arms loyal to the regime in Iran that you'd have to do an awful lot of killing to get a complete regime change and a good outcome. However, the regime is at its weakest point since 1979, so there's a tipping point to potentially exploit there. But we know that regime change is very challenging to do successfully. We've not seen a really good example, certainly in the Middle East, for a very long time. I think if we look at Portugal, is probably the last regime change that went really, really smoothly. But in the Middle East, we haven't seen a smooth transition at all anywhere. So there's a sort of inbuilt skepticism about that. But there are different conditions in Iran. They're a proper country. They're not lines drawn on a map by France or the UK in sometime in the early 1900s. You know, this is a real cohesive country with centuries of history. So it might have that unison that we've seen in Syria or Iraq, where you had a minority governing over a majority who were then completely in disarray. But, you know, getting rid of all the IRGC players is exceptionally difficult due to A, their radicalization, and B, the numbers that we're talking about. So what I could see is something like a decapitation strike or a punitive strike against the worst IRGC bases who've killed the most people. Or we could see 4 to 5 days of rolling airstrikes where there's planes in the sky constantly just bombing the hell out of everything. And that would give a pretty good chance of regime change. But then what comes next? So there's loads of intangibles. There's loads of unknowns. There's no guarantee of success. And we don't know how much or how little the Americans really want to do here. So I take a kind of 50-50 view as to whether this is actually going to end up how we want it to end up or not.
Yeah, I mean, we had on the Brink a couple of weeks ago, Khazra Arabi, the Iranian analyst, which was a fantastic episode, and he was talking about the need to target, I think, 11 IRGC bases that are the heart of the organs of apparatus to suppress the domestic population, as well as the Ayatollah's office and other bits and bobs. But it feels to me as if the military situation has changed since the 12-day war. For one thing, there's now Turkish radar in Damascus, which could prove a problem with Israeli jets flying overhead. Also, the ballistic missiles stockpiles are built up once again in Iran and hidden far away from Israeli reach as possible. I mean, do you think there could be some hidden surprises there?
Yeah, potentially. The Iranians aren't stupid and they do adapt. And I was with the Israeli Air Force a few weeks ago, and they were saying that they've actually seen Iranian efforts in Iraq to try and shut down the skies to the refueling aircraft for Israel. I think if anything does go, I'd be really surprised if the IDF were involved.
Yeah.
For starters, America doesn't need them. Yes, the Israeli Air Force are very good, but the United States military apparatus is levels above anyone else in the world.
Yeah.
It's hard to overstate just how much capability they have. They don't need the Israelis to join in on this one if they decide to go for it. And I suspect the Israeli Air Force will be playing defense, as the Americans might say, rather than offense on this one, because there is, as you say, there is the missile stocks that have been recovered. Launchers are obviously going to be a priority target, but solid fuel missiles like Iran has don't need that slow launch time that liquid fuel missiles need, and that's what Iran's been focusing on. So I can imagine certainly they will be launching missiles at Tel Aviv again. If I owned a skyscraper in Dubai, I'd be quite twitchy at this point. That makes a very juicy target for an Iranian drone. Lots of things the Iranian regime could do that they will never be decisive, but they will be nihilistic, and they will just look to cause as much damage as possible, which is one of the reasons, of course, why Qatar and Saudi and the UAE have all been exhorting Trump not to do anything at this point. And it's actually reported that Israel is also not especially keen on strikes right now. And if it had been 3 weeks ago, maybe there was a case for it, when there may have been that chance for the protesters to actually, swoop in and do something. But now the protests have been so heavily suppressed, as the moment passed, we'll never know until hindsight kicks in.
I mean, as far as I understand it, the Israelis have been quite careful not to lobby Trump to do it, because if he does it and it goes wrong, they'll get the blame, and they don't want that to happen. But Catherine, what do you think? I mean, in terms of the regional power balance, what would be a best case scenario, do you think?
Look, the thing I'm going to say, and I've actually written it in a tweet, there's a deal to be made, but we need to think long term, and we need to think bigger and beyond the regime. The way I see it, once we have a free Iran, and it's a matter, look, it's a question of time. The way I see things, Iranians have spoken freedom, honestly, and I'm not trying to be lyrical or to be theatrical. It's a reality. Once you understand that there's a degree of a social contract between the tyrant and the people. That contract has been broken. People cannot go back. The genie cannot be put back into that bottle. They want freedom. They will get it. Now, the fear I have is that if we don't accompany and support that desire, we're going to end up with an Afghanistan 2.0, potentially North Korea, if they decide to reinvent themselves into a military dictatorship, which scares me, because then we have a bigger problem. Now, the fear too is balkanization. And I know that some people have floated the idea thinking, oh, it's a great idea. No, it would be terrible. Iran is a united country. It's a sovereign nation. Let's keep it that way. And it's not the wishes of the people. So there are a lot of dangers. Now, quite frankly, what the neighbors want, especially Qatar, I don't really care. Because people are getting butchered. People are dying in the streets. We're talking about crimes against humanity. We need to go get them. If we could muster the courage to go get Saddam Hussein, I don't understand what's the wait for when it comes to Ayatollah Khamenei. I mean, the guy needs to go. Now, if Donald Trump is listening, there's a thing that he could do. If we were to reimagine the region and actually decide that there is an opportunity for peace, that would actually include Gaza to some extent, where if we were to join Afghanistan through Iran, open up and create some kind of an opening onto the sea through Bandar Abbas, cut through, go up the strait, not through the Houthis, so you forget Yemen, you ease, I would say, the Egyptian won't like me, the Suez Canal, you create an opening that will go through Dubai, straight through Saudi Arabia, Kaaba, let's go, Israel, you plug back into Cyprus, into Greece, you created yourself the Abraham trade route. And I've written about it. This is something that is durable, that would guarantee peace for Israel for the next, I would say, 50 years, and we could breathe a little bit. Why? Because it would not be in the interest of neighboring nations to hate on us or to beat us up or to try to declare war, because it would go against their financial interest and the stability of their economy. It would make sense for the West to be negotiating something called energy security at a time where they have to depend on Qatar. Russia is under sanction. It's a problem. So they could get on with that program, decide to pay or at least to have energy at a discount, or pay a premium when the Iranians decide to free the country and realize that Britain did not play fair.
Yeah, but I mean that would work so long as you're dealing with hostile states that act in their own economic self-interest. But we've seen, for example, with Gaza, that the economic self-interest of Hamas, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu's conceptia was based on the idea that they wouldn't do something to harm themselves, and then they did.
I agree, but on the basis that the regime of Iran would not be around anymore to prop up and finance and militarize Hamas, then we don't have a problem. The point is, look, as far as the money is concerned, Qatar leads the show. So we need to deal with that reality. So dealing with Qatar is not a great idea because you are pushing the time when you will need to do something about it further down the road, which means that you're going to have to exert even more resources and energy into defeating that enemy that you just propped up, thinking I can benefit from it. I think it's a mistake. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, Iran is the source of all terror, ideologically, militarily speaking, is that it has served to arm Hezbollah, Hamas, PMU, let's go. They have trained them, they have indoctrinated the youth. How many generations can we afford to lose? My answer would be none. Not anymore.
Yeah.
And so we need to understand that what happens today, tomorrow after tomorrow, will determine the fate of the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So this is not a decision that we can take lightly. Unfortunately, people do not like wars. I don't like them either. Sometimes they're necessary.
Yeah, I mean, bringing it back to Gaza, Andrew, I mean, is it possible to speculate as to how the fall of the Iranian regime would affect things on the ground in Gaza? I mean, it could go a million ways, couldn't it? But have you got any sort of ideas of the main ones?
It could. I mean, there's probably just worth repeating a correction of a common misunderstanding that Hamas is not a proxy of Iran. Hamas are Sunni. They're not Shias like the Iranians. They are an ally of Iran who take funding and weapons from Iran and some training. But they're not a direct proxy in the way that Hezbollah are. You know,
and they're funded more by Qatar, aren't they, as well? More by Qatar than by.
That's their main financial backer, and they also get military support from the Turkish. And I think that's probably the country missing from the paradigm that Catherine outlined, and that is that the new military power in the Middle East is going to be Turkey going forward. As part of the deal that Trump struck to get the hostages released, Turkey were essentially given free rein in Syria, and on top of that, they've been given access to the F-35 program again. So Turkey is militarily very much on the rise. They certainly have ambitions to regain Ottoman powers of influence, if not Ottoman territory. And unfortunately, the way Turkey is now playing things out in Syria, I think we're looking like a jihadi state back again on Israel's doorstep, because you know the ISIS fighters are going to be freed. Jilani is very much playing both sides, as so many Arab states do. And Turkey, I think, is a huge concern in the amount of freedom they have. And when it comes to Gaza, of course, they're on the board of peace. Now, they've been pushing to get their own troops as part of the International Security Force, and Israel had vetoed it. But if nothing is coming off the ground when it comes to this phase 2 plan moving forward, I can see a scenario where Trump basically directs Turkish troops to go in. And you know, Bibi is in a real rock and a hard place when it comes to Washington. I think Israel's in danger of being sidelined in this process. And that could present huge challenges further down the line.
What do you think, Catherine, about Gaza and the prospects for peace, or the successful rollout of the peace plan?
I don't see it. I mean, honestly, I mean, the word peace and Hamas in the same sentence just don't go well together. I don't believe Hamas. I don't trust Hamas. I don't want Hamas to be even breathing. Look, we talk about Gaza and Gazans as if they have a say. Hamas took over. Those people too. I mean, not that they stood up and, you know, try to do anything or say anything, but we're going to pretend that they want freedom. So what are we doing? We're allowing for this entity, this terrorist organization, to breathe and allow it to continue indoctrination and to breed the next generation of Hamas fighters. And surprise, surprise, they will come and hate on Israel. And I mean, what is it that we're not understanding in this equation? There's a cycle that needs to be broken. Hamas cannot stay. The notion that we can negotiate, that we should negotiate with Hamas when what we want is to destroy Hamas is slightly, I don't know, misguided would be the polite version of what I want to say. It's insane. It's asking Israel to shoot itself in the foot and to pretend that it's fine.
It sounds to me as if you're skeptical of Hamas's chances of disarming.
Just ever so slightly. But I'm French, so I'm very dramatic.
Yeah, what do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I've been skeptical of this plan from the start. The key issue is, though, that nobody has yet come up with a solution as to how to get rid of Hamas. And I can tell you what the plan is as it stands. Now, I think it's also worth caveating this, that this is now kind of outside of Israel's hands. Like, this is now American-owned. Nothing is going to happen in Gaza without American permission and say-so. So the odds, I think, of the IDF going back to full-scale war in Gaza are almost zero at this point. Trump has this as a feather in his cap. One of the 8 wars that he's brought peace to, or whatever ludicrous nonsense he's claiming. But this is he wants to go back to. And we've seen time and time again him threatening Hamas with, we're going to open the gates of hell or whatever it was. And then nothing really happened until a few weeks later. So the real problem here is nobody has yet proposed a sensible plan of removing Hamas. Now, the idea is that in the Israeli half of Gaza, they're going to rebuild. People will be filtered out of Hamas's half of Gaza. They'll live happily and peacefully forever in the eastern half of Gaza. And then once they're all out, they can go in and destroy Hamas's infrastructure in the west of Gaza. I just don't buy it. I think this is a decades-long plan. I think this plan has a lifespan of 3 years, which is until Mr. Trump leaves the White House. I don't see Trump's successor being super keen on this plan. If it's a Democrat, they definitely won't be. If it's a Republican, it depends which one it is. If it's Vance, he won't be. If it's Rubio, maybe he will. Who knows? But there is a solid, I think, hard stop in this plan in its current form, and that is 3 years from now. That's if they can even get the international security force over the line to replace the IDF on the yellow line. I don't see a way of weaseling out Hamas. Look, we did this episode this week of the Brink with Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, and he was talking about the value of the aid that's gone into Gaza since the ceasefire is close to 1 billion shekels, of which 40 to 50% is going into Hamas's pockets, directly or indirectly. So at the moment, we have a position where Hamas is now richer than they were before the ceasefire. They are fully consolidated in that western half of Gaza. In spite of Israel's attempts to man militias and fund and arm them, it's not really having huge amounts of impact. They've killed most of their opposition already. As many as 6,000 Gazans have been executed since the ceasefire kicked in. Like, how on earth do you then start winkling out this terrorist organization that owns everything in Gaza, from the judiciary to the health ministry to the people who collect the bins? Not that anyone's doing that right now, but you see what I'm saying. It's pervasive. It's every aspect of Gazan society, and you have a population of 2 million radicalized people who already hated Israel on 6th of October 2023 and have just had the crap bombed out of them for 2 years and all their homes destroyed. So they're not going to be in a place where they're receptive to ideas about peaceful coexistence with Israel. So, you've got a position now where
Oh, Andrew, we've lost you.
Some sort of halfway house. I'm sorry. Am I back?
You're back.
Yeah, you're back.
How are we doing? Got me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my prediction is we're going to reach some kind of halfway house where Hamas will hand over their heavy weapons and retain their light arms, and everyone will say that's Hamas disarmed, which is plainly a nonsense. They will still retain enough firepower to certainly control the population.
60,000 Kalashnikovs.
Yeah, it's going to be presentational. It's going to be meaningless, but it will give Trump the win that he needs, and so that's what's going to happen.
And of course, Trump has been, planning for quite a long time and campaigning even to tear up the rules, rewrite the rules, as he put it, and change the constitution to allow him to run for another term in office, which may extend this plan into the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth year.
Yeah, very possibly, but hopefully that's jest rather than absolute destruction of the United States of America.
Well, you can literally buy rewrite the rules merch on the Trump website at the moment. 2020 Trump 2028.
Well, look, as angry as I am with America at the moment, the last thing I want is to see them destroyed. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, and Catherine, maybe just we can wind up with the last topic now, and then take some questions. But just to bring this back to Holocaust Memorial Day, we've talked about how, in Britain, it seems that people are beginning to think that it's not so relevant anymore. Let's just let bygones be bygones and not focus too much on the Holocaust. To me, it seems that this says quite a lot, not so much about the Jews, but about the West and how the lessons of the Holocaust, i.e., when you're faced with evil, you have to fight it, seem to be rather remote from the way that we think these days. What's your take on it?
So what I think there's a great degree of guilt that they would like to kind of set aside and forget. They don't want to be reminded. And something tells me that the reason why they don't want to be reminded is because they've done it again. I mean, when October 7th happened, the world took really long time to kind of for 5 minutes get on board with the fact that Jews get butchered again. And that it wasn't great. Say something. Have a heartbeat for 2 seconds. Didn't last long. It took them forever to react. And when they did for 5 minutes. And then they wanted us to move, to kind of change the subject and just, don't talk about that. Still, are you still on this? I mean, I actually heard this from France, with the eyes rolling saying, "Oh, we're still doing that." And I was like, yeah, we're going to be doing that until the last one is home. I think so. There's a lot of that. There's also a lot to do with the fact that there's a certain lobby that is really loud and feel very victimized, even though they're not the one being victimized. It's rather us being victimized, but we don't behave as victim because we don't see ourselves that way. We survive evil and we fight on. And I think this is both a curse and a blessing, is that I don't want to be a victim ever, and I don't think that you do. I don't think that any of us want to be victim. It's useless, it's pointless, doesn't help anybody. At the same time, we need to remember that 6 million lives were lost to a machine that wanted to annihilate an entire people on the basis of, we just don't like you. Pretty much, because I don't know what the argument was. I mean, we control the weather, we control the financial system, we control. If we were that much in control, I don't see how that would have been possible to take us out. And they tried to do it. Thankfully, they did not succeed. And I don't think that anyone would ever, because we tend to be resilient. But I think it's important to remember that humanity can go there. And it's not because it happened to us, it's because it happened. And I don't understand why people are so willing and eager to erase history, because this is what we're talking about. By not teaching history, and if you don't want to talk about the Shoah, I mean, come on, it's kind of a big chapter of history with the capital H, and it's independent from us. The fact that it happened, that this was a machine architected and set on annihilating people, regardless of why and who they were, is too horrible to not contemplate, study, try to understand, so that we don't repeat it. But this notion that, oh, let's just move on from it because it happened a long time ago, I profoundly disagree with, because, I mean, we all know the old saying, if you don't learn from history, you are bound to repeat it. And fortunately, we kind of have already. And I think that was kind of the subject of your book. That was brilliant, by the way. Come on. I want to remember, not because I want to wallow in self-pity and think, oh, poor me, we all lost people. It's not about that. It's about setting the record straight and ensuring that our kids are equipped to understand and remember and pick up on the markers of a Shoah when it's in the making. Hello, October 7th, people. It's also for other generations to understand that, yes, you have done that. Not that you're responsible for it, but you are capable, if things are not set in motion to prevent it, to go there yet again.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, to perhaps nudge this into slightly more controversial territory, just to finish, I wonder whether within the Jewish community, we've sort of the people who are more affluent, maybe assimilated, liberal-minded, perhaps on the left in the Jewish community, the elites, shall we say, have perhaps gone hand in hand with a kind of movement of liberal, multicultural niceness, which has allowed itself to become a Trojan horse for this new anti-Semitism. I mean, I think, for example, of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, which from the beginning, when it was set up during the Blair government, wasn't just marking the Holocaust, but also Rwanda, Bosnia, and Cambodia. And it seems to me that from the beginning, anybody with sense can see, why if I want to mourn my grandfather, have I also got to mourn yours from halfway across the world? The point of the Holocaust is it's a particular loss and a particular crime, not that it's universalized to become a synonym for genocide. And we saw in 2024, the invitation sent out by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust included a mention of the sufferings of Palestinian civilians in Gaza and caused outrage and an apology. It's no surprise that then Jews were erased from Holocaust Memorial commemorations last year. Many dignitaries around the world tweeted about 6 million people being killed without mentioning why they were killed or who they were. And the result is now, this year, that people aren't commemorating the Holocaust as much anymore. So I wonder whether there's a lesson for us here in terms of where the Jewish community needs to stand and how much more definite we need to be about who we are, what we defy, what we stand for, and what we won't tolerate.
Okay, so I'm going to just interject because Kat actually has to leave, and I'm keeping time on you, Kat.
I have
she's got to go to a meeting, and it's
You've got the party next door.
No, it's not a party. I have Aryan University coming to meet with me, the dean. So I have to go. I apologize. It was
Okay,
a
Kat.
pleasure. Jake, Andrew, so glad that we met. Kinda. Let's talk again. Jake, you're brilliant. Buy his books, people. They are actually brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye bye, Catherine.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, back to you, gents.
Well, I think it's question time now.
Yes, okay, fine. So we've got 3 people have got their hands raised so far. John, John Spain, can I ask you to unmute yourself? And if you'd kindly put on your video. John, are you with us? No, he's not unmuting. Okay, we'll go over to you, Michael.
Oh, I am.
Hi.
Reach the controls. Sorry.
Okay,
Hi,
would you like to ask your question?
Thanks very much. It's a privilege to be able to listen to this. And Jake, great to say hello because I live in Winchester as well, actually. So it's great to say hello.
Oh, really? Whereabouts?
I'd like to ask you, if I may, please, to give us your thoughts, please, in relation to a comment that Catherine made, which was Catherine made a comment almost in passing about the challenges.
Oh, Michael, you've gone on mute. Michael, you've gone back on mute.
I beg your pardon. My question, please, is to pick up on something that Catherine said, almost in passing, about the challenges that are faced in European capitals, which are not actually being addressed. And I think what Catherine was talking about was the things like the hate marches and all that goes with that. And I would just appreciate your thoughts, please, as to what in this, if you just take this country as an example, what you believe ought to be done by, whether it's the police, the government, etc., to address those challenges that we see, please.
Good question. What do you think, Andrew?
I can start with this one. Look, the bottom line is that these people know what the law in the UK is. They're very good at taking it to the line. Like, we have freedom of assembly in the UK. The only threshold that can be crossed to get these things banned is if there's, a serious risk of violence or serious disorder. And actually, the Palestinian marches haven't been that violent. There've been incidences in certain side protests, but the big main ones have actually been, relatively peaceful. And so there's no real grounds to ban them, no real grounds to stop them doing that. I think the better answer, is to be more organised when it comes to putting in protests about where they go. So if they're going past the synagogue or they're going through a Jewish area, then there's a very good grounds to ask for conditions to be put in place so they can't disrupt the day-to-day lives of Jewish worshippers or similar. But they know what they're doing, and they're not stupid, and they know where the line is, and they know not to go over it. And that is essentially how they operate. They look at our freedoms, our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly, and they exploit it. And that puts us in a real bind, because either we start giving up our freedoms by getting legal changes put in place to make sure we can start banning stuff we don't like, or we have to suck it up. And there's not really a middle ground here, which makes, I think, life incredibly challenging when it comes to stuff like those hate marches every week. And don't get me wrong, there were hundreds of arrests throughout the 2 years about, for anti-Semitic speech or, supporting the prescribed group, hundreds of arrests. But that hasn't had a deterrence effect. And look, I've always said this to the protesters: look, if you're on a march where people are chanting Nazi slogans, you're on a Nazi march. If you're on a march where people are chanting anti-Semitic slogans, you're on an anti-Semitic march. And I think our side of the debate has really failed to make that case to the wider population until Bondi, which I think was a change, change in the mood and the atmosphere and the reception of these things. On top of that, prescribing Palestine action and people seeing the buffoons causing real problem in London and getting arrested, I've detected a sort of change of mood in the general neutral population, if you will. So I think we might be past the tipping point of that. And of course, Gaza's out of the headlines, which is really, really helpful when it comes to quieting this stuff down. But yeah, we're on the horns of that dilemma. Do we start cutting our own freedoms, or do we just have to tolerate it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is perhaps more we can do structurally in addition. I mean, for example, banning the Muslim Brotherhood would be a huge step that would require careful thought and a lot of resources. But the Muslim Brotherhood does drive a lot of this stuff, and beginning to put them on the back foot, make them pursued, would help. Similarly with the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, banning them and taking away the Ayatollah's infrastructure. I mean, he has as Khazra said on the Brink the other day, he has an office in London. Why does the Ayatollah, who's massacring more than 30,000 people in Iran, have an office in London? And that's okay, which has acted as a muster point for pro-Iran regime demonstrations in London. So that should be gone. Muslim Brotherhood should be gone. I also think we need to be far more robust with what we can do. I can't understand why the universities should not be depoliticized. I think that demonstrations should be banned on universities. I think that overt political statements which intimidate students should be banned on universities. Universities are not public places, they're private institutions. And they should be able to enforce these measures to prevent radicalism. In the current climate, things have gone too far. We can ban that. That would really help. I think that further restrictions could be placed on these demonstrations. As Andrew says, if they've got to go ahead under the current law, we can at least restrict where they go, not just so they don't go past synagogues, but so they don't go on a weekend, or so they could be moved out away from from pressure points, from places that are especially busy in London. Begin to squeeze them a bit. I think that we can really target hate preachers who at the moment seem to act with relative impunity up and down the country in mosques, spewing their bile, anti-Western bile, anti-Semitic bile. We can begin to enforce the law against these people, arrest them, get our deportation mechanism going, get them out. We need to start being intolerant towards these people. As Karl Popper wrote, if we extend unlimited tolerance to the intolerant, then sooner or later, tolerance will be done away with and the tolerant with them. And we're at that position now. We're allowing people who wish to subvert us use the instruments of an open society to try to overturn an open society. And until we get tough sooner rather than later, we ain't going to win this one.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yes, Jake. And this is why We Believe in Israel and the NJA are launching a parliamentary campaign to push to urge the UK government to prescribe both the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood, which won't be before time, but hopefully we'll see how that goes. Okay, Glenn, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I can.
Put your question. Thanks.
Yeah, so first of all, just want to say thanks for doing this. I'm glad that Catherine got in touch with you. Something I suggested on WhatsApp to her a while ago. A couple of things just to pick up on what Andrew was saying. Fully agree. But in the UK, you might have detected I'm from Ireland or Northern Ireland. In the UK, we already have legislation which was applied to this part of the United Kingdom to ban parades is called the Parades Commission. Obviously, it's very local, it's very historical, Irish, Northern Irish thing, directed against one part of the population who were deemed, parades were deemed to be unacceptable in certain areas. That legislation was created in Westminster, and it could be created in Westminster quite easily for these marches. And a number of things. To Kat's point on the dilution, I think that also, Jack, you said it as well, the dilution of Shoah, a genocide. Even the Lemkin Institute, named after the person who created the genocide definition, is going after these other, what it says, it's saying that there's genocide against the Palestinians. It's saying, it talks about Rwanda, obviously. I don't think they've said anything about Iran so far. So there's a selective targeting of certain groups. And, we have to be able to articulate that. And I know that you are doing that in your podcasts and Substacks, but somehow we need to get it to the next level, and it should be talked about in Parliament. I mean, Winston Churchill's called
Glenn,
what became the Holocaust.
Your question?
Well, that was sort of the question. I was saying, Winston Churchill said there was a crime that had no name, which eventually was described as the Shoah or the Holocaust. How do we get that level of in Parliament, in our parliaments, are being called out? That's sort of a question, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Gentlemen.
Shall I take it? I mean, I just think we're really in a position where the parties of the left shamefully aren't going to take this stuff seriously. They make noises, they make sort of half-assed attempts at protecting Jews, but then they go and recognise a state of Palestine emboldening supporters of Hamas in the same breath. So I think that really it's going to be something that the right of politics will do. I think that the right of politics will do it when they come in. Hopefully it will be at the next election. I have a sort of dream based on current polling that one party of the right will be in power and the other will be in opposition. How good would that be? Probably ain't going to happen, but it would be pretty good if it did. But either way, I mean, if I'm not party political, and nor's Andrew, but if Farage comes in, we would expect him to ban the Muslim Brotherhood and take this stuff seriously. Suella's just defected to Reform. She's a big fan. I mean, she was sacked, don't forget, partly for calling the hate marches. So she's definitely a stalwart on our side of the argument, as are many others in the party, although perhaps not all of them. So I think it's going to these matters will come before Parliament when the right is back in power, whichever party it is. That's what I think. Well, what do you reckon, Andrew?
If only Suella had been in an office of state where she could have made a difference. What could have been?
Well, she tried to, and she was sacked from it, wasn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, fair. But look, the going back to the Northern Ireland point, it kind of tallies with my point, because those marches were banned because they had a serious risk of violence and disorder that is a threshold that has not been yet crossed in London. But certainly by the main Saturday marches, there have been other incidents where there were police officers injured and bottles thrown and such like. But look, there is always that risk with every protest, as we saw with the Iranians at their embassy the other day. I just, as a small L liberal, small C conservative, I'm just loath to ban stuff. I think as you say, we should be attacking the problem at source rather than going down the prohibition route. Like we need to understand the reasons why people are so easily manipulated by Muslim Brotherhood and mass propaganda. Why is our education system failing so badly that people aren't able to think critically when they see Hamas propaganda on the internet? Why is our academic sector so subverted that people so easily and readily push out Hamas propaganda? Why has the Lancet happily published utter nonsense about the number of people in Gaza who are dead? There are real underlying structural issues here, and I kind of agree with you, Jake, that they're the things that need to be attacked rather than just banning stuff we don't like, because that prohibition's been tried on any number of topics and issues and seldom works. So attacking the underlying source of the problem is probably a better solution.
Yeah, although I have become more pro banning face masks, frankly, in a public place.
Okay, thank you. Caroline, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for another amazing chat, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to be too depressing, so forgive me, but I've been following what's going on here for 5 years, and I follow a lot of people about what's going on in Europe. And obviously, nothing is going to happen under this government. It's just going to get worse by the day, because it is getting worse. Whether it's Crowborough with British people, whether it's with Jews, whether it's with students, and the whole of our country has been infiltrated. And I'm not feeling very positive about Europe turning around. It sounds very negative. I don't know if I'm negative or a realist or
Caroline, can we get to a question so that
yeah.
others
So what? Okay. So what?
Thanks.
I mean, I agree with what both you, Andrew, and Jake said, but even with reforming, because we've got so much going on everywhere, what are the chances? Because they've had decades doing this.
Jake?
Well, I know where you're coming from. I feel that my feelings about, veer from optimism to pessimism like a wonky supermarket trolley, day by day. It's very difficult to know where things are going. Quite recently on the Brink, we interviewed Bernard-Henri Lévy, the French philosopher, and he pointed out that Nazi Germany was overcome and Germany managed to recover itself thereafter, which was quite a powerful statement from him, I thought, that European countries have been through worse and have managed to pick up where they left off before. Now, just because they've done it before doesn't mean that we can do the same with this challenge that we're facing at the moment. Of course, is very different. But I think it does show the power of our civilization, of our long civilization that has been developing for so many centuries, thousands of years. And although it's really run aground over the past few decades, it's been building up its identity for far longer. And so in my more optimistic frame of mind, I return to that thought. But like I say, then the supermarket trolley veers the other way, and before I know it, I'm in the frozen fish aisle.
Well, you really want to be in the dessert aisle. But the positivity I have on this is that there are examples from around Europe of countries that are taking steps to fix some of the problems. Look at Denmark. They've made great strides in terms of making sure that non-Danish populations are properly assimilated, that they all speak Danish, that there are certain elements of Danishness that are obligatory if you want to stay in Denmark. And in the UK, I think it has to come from the bottom up. I think our politicians need to be kicked up the backside to make real change happen, and we've never really had that. I think Brexit was probably the last time it happened. No matter which way you voted on that, it was certainly a seismic change in our politics. And that came from the bottom up. That came from a groundswell campaign. But all the elites were opposed to it, and yet the public vote went the other way. And we're seeing the polls at the moment with reform. People are clearly not happy with the status quo. Now, I'm not a reform supporter, but you can see that when the mood changes amongst the people, then the politics changes in due course. And it's a slow lag. It's not going to happen quickly. But we A, have that example, B, have a groundswell of politics that seem to be on the change. So there is a chance, I think, especially when people do see things like the Maccabi Tel Aviv ban, when they see these idiots protesting in London every weekend, getting arrested constantly, when they when they understand how much of their tax money is going to policing this stuff. We were into the millions and millions and millions of taxpayers' money on it. And, that groundswell, I think, will eventually make the difference, but it won't be quick.
Okay, thank you. Gents, do you have time for me to put another couple of questions to you?
Yeah, we can go. We can have one or two more.
Yep,
two more,
okay.
maybe. Yep.
Okay, so Paul, if you could, Paul Truhella, if you could unmute yourself, please. Paul, are you there? Paul? No, okay, we'll go over to you.
Hello.
Okay, Paul's
Hello.
unmuted himself.
Unmuted.
Paul, are you able to put your video on?
I don't know. Oh, I'll
Okay.
stop the video. Okay.
Well, if you could just put your question straight over, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd just like to put you for your responses. What I'm missing from discussion is the particular relevance and history of Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was an agent of Nazi Germany's Holocaust to a very high degree, and who in March 1944 on Berlin radio delivered an address in Arabic in which he called to his listeners, "Kill the Jews wherever you find them." Now,
Paul, can you get to your question, please, because we are on limited
and the
time.
question is, this is tremendous relevance to the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, to which al-Husseini had a very close allegiance. And my understanding is that Khomeini actually was interested in the subject at around about that time. So on this issue, we have the issue of Islam or Nazism. And I think it's a major issue, a historical issue, which has not received anything like adequate attention for its significance, both at that time, but for today. So, but I'd like to know what your thoughts about this are. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Well, if I jump into this one, my book, Israelophobia, has quite a lot on Haj Amin al-Husseini and the influence of the Nazis on the on Islam, modern Islamism. In fact, I think that really when you look at modern Islamism and modern radical progressivism, the two horns of the anti-Israel movement in the West, at least Western Europe, they really derive from the two worst regimes in European history, the Nazi regime and the Soviet Union. In terms of Haj Amin al-Husseini, it's interesting. I mean, you're right. He was a propagandist for Hitler who translated Nazism into Arabic and pumped it out into the Arab world via the Wallis, the radio. He then joined the Muslim Brotherhood. It's interesting, though, that when it came to the point where the partition of Israel, of Palestine, was proposed, and the Jews famously accepted it, and the Arabs rejected it, the spokesman for the Palestinian Arabs who rejected that proposal was Haj Amin al-Husseini himself, who had fled justice in Europe, washed up back in Palestine, joined the Muslim Brotherhood, and then he became the leader of the Palestinians that the West went to as a representative. And it all went downhill from there, with him calling for bloodletting and the War of 1948 and so on. So you're right. I've done a whole chapter of it in my book, Israelophobia, and Islamism is really a form of Nazism. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Jake. Okay, we'll go over just a bit of time. We'll go to Helen. Helen, are you able to unmute yourself? And if you could turn on your video.
No, I prefer not to.
Okay, if you could just get straight to your question, please.
Great to hear you. I've only been here for a while, but talking about how you think things can change, have either of you ever tried to catch Mercury? Mercury slips, you cannot catch it. And I just feel that the psychological stuff that's going on out there, it cannot be changed. I just want to know how you think it can be changed.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Which one of you gents would like to respond to that first?
Yeah, well, as I said before, it needs to come from the ground up. It needs to be there needs to be enough people that want it to change for it to change. And really, I think the mission that we have is showing people that it does, and then persuading them why it does. And
but how can you talk to these people? How can you talk to these rioters in the street?
No, we don't. We're not talking to them, but they're a lost cause. That's fine. There are people that you'll never change. Likewise, if I tried to suddenly come on this call and persuade you all that Israel was evil and you should be anti-Zionist, then that wouldn't work either, no matter what I said or what evidence I gave you. The people we're focusing on are the 90% of people who don't give a damn about the Middle East. They don't give a damn about Israel. It's just another war in the Middle East. We're used to them. We've had 20 years of them, and that's really all they know about it, apart from seeing a picture of a dead baby on X and they think it's very sad, and then they move on, scrolling with their thumb to go and look at funny dog videos. Like, most people don't care. They have mortgages to pay, families to feed, jobs to go to, and this is, at best a distraction for them. But if you can make the case to those people that actually what we're seeing is really bad for our country, it's really bad for our democracy, it's really bad for our society, if you can make that case, probably it needs to be at an emotional level rather than a rational level. But if you can get their emotional buy-in, then you're getting people to start voting on these issues, getting people to start putting pressure on their members of parliament and their local councillors and such like. And that's when you start seeing change from the ground up. But none of this is quick or easy. And it takes time and effort and, frankly, a lot better coordination than we've seen thus far.
Hey, Jake, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think we've covered that. Do you want to go for one more question to round off?
Okay, if you're okay to take Nahum's question, Nahum, if you can are you able to put your, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a very interesting evening. I just wanted to ask and take issue with a point that Andrew made about whether Trump really does own Gaza and whether Hamas being disarmed yet holding on to their small arms is something that will be allowed to happen. Because I don't think, in my opinion, that the Israeli public, especially, and also bearing in mind it's an election year, would accept to see Hamas living to fight another day, even with small arms, and the look would be as if they didn't lose. The look would be,
can you get to the question, please?
Yes, so my question is, could you foresee that Israel, regardless, would go? I know there are already plans in place to attack Gaza City, attack Hamas. Do you see this actually, the possibility of this happening if they don't disarm completely?
Good. Which one of you would like to respond to Nahum?
Andrew's the expert.
Unfortunately, like, the Israeli public doesn't get a say anymore. This has been taken go to the CMCC in Kiryat Gat. It's very clear who's running the show now when it comes to Gaza, and it's not Israel at all. And they are unfortunately a taker of decisions rather than a maker of decisions at this point. So it's really irrelevant how the Israeli public feel, because Mr. Trump is the man calling the shots. There have even been instances, in the last 3 months where Hamas have done something in Israel, they've wanted to respond, the Americans have said no. And by the same token, they've caught wind of Hamas attacks being planned, and they've routed through Egypt, and they've said to Hamas, don't even think about it. So this is the Americans' business now. They own Gaza, and what Israel wants to do is very much secondary, especially now that Qatar and Turkey have such strong votes when it comes to Gaza. And I know that's not a pleasant or an easy thing to hear, but unfortunately that's how things are playing out.
But Israel attacked Osirak without American approval.
Yes, but I don't think Mr. Trump was president at the time. So there are internal politics here that, frankly, the cost-benefit analysis of them chinning off Mr. Trump is probably very much in the loss column rather than the benefit column at this point, because Hamas no longer represents a threat to Israel in any way as they stand. They can't attack Israel. They don't have the rockets to attack Israel. Like, they're just not a threat right now. So it would burn far too much diplomatic goodwill if they acted unilaterally. I mean, even the operation to recover Ran Gavili was only allowed once the Americans had given permission for it. This wasn't just an IDF operation. It was one that the Americans condoned because they want to press on with phase 2 and get the Rafah crossing open. And Israel wouldn't agree to that until they got Ran Gavili back. So, we're very much in a best case scenario, a 3-way conversation here. In a 1-way conversation, it might just be that America's calling the shots. So, it's not ideal, but that's where we're at.
Okay. Well, that's it with the questions for this evening. Which leaves me just to thank both of you. You, Jake, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join us. And you, Andrew, thank you for making the effort to join us from the car. I'd like to just add to everyone that Andrew is not driving the vehicle; he's just a passenger. Have a safe rest of your journey, and just know that we as a community in the UK, we are very blessed, and we are also very grateful to have you, Jake, and you, Andrew, two stalwart supporters and also very sharp minds to stand up for Israel and our community here and around the world. Everyone here, I will be sending out an email tomorrow with a recording to this, and I will also include some links to both of Jake's books, Israelophobia and his latest book, Never Again. And yes, just thank you to everyone who joined. And once again, thank you to our guests, Jake and Andrew. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you from me as well.
And from you, Roger, as well.
Very nice.
Yeah,
well done.
Thank you for having us,
Take care.
and we'll see you on the brink.
Yes, indeed.
You do.
Indeed. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Good night, gents.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Night, everybody.